Welcome to Microfinance Podcast, bringing microfinance to your screen. This episode is produced by MicroSave, together with ShoreBank Exchange.
Mathematics. I talked a little bit about them already. Are the margins roughly the same? Are the big expense categories roughly the same? How about working capital? Does the company have enough working capital to continue to adequately serve its market and to stand up against the competition? And the key thing here is, if they have accounts receivable, are they being collected as quickly as they were? If they've had to shift markets and move to contracts from the government, the contracts may be very good. They may be profitable. They may be a good niche for the business. But one thing we can say about governments all over the globe is that they very rarely pay quickly. In fact, if the company's projections were built upon receivables turning over every 45 days, if now your borrower is doing 60% of his business with the government, there may well be a cash flow problem that is only getting worse, not because the government won't pay, but because the government pays on average in 120 or 150 days. That would be a very important thing for you to know. Always try to determine what cash flow is now. Let's move on to my favorite subject anyway, which is management. How about those weaknesses? Have they gotten a little bit better? Have they gotten worse? I don't mean to always sound like a cynic. They may not always get worse. How about that question of execution? If your manager, your owner, was weak on developing people and delegating authority before, is that still the case? Or has she been able to delegate some authority as the company has grown to someone else? If so, how do they check that someone is doing their job? How flexible is your borrower? Personally flexible? It takes a lot of flexibility to survive in a small or even a medium-sized enterprise, particularly in developing economies. You may have to entirely switch markets. You may have to switch workforces. You may have to learn about a new field. You have to be a very flexible person. If your borrower was a kind of rigid personality that only wanted to do one thing at a time and do it perfectly, then he or she may not be suited, after all, to the kinds of market and challenges that they're finding. And you should make that judgment. Excuse me. Does your borrower finally, does your owner have a roadmap? What's a roadmap? Well, some kind of a general plan. I'm not talking about some kind of 60-page strategic plan that a management consultant would do. No, I'm talking about where they want to go in the next 2 years. Will they continue on with this market? Why or why not? Will they expand what they've been doing? Why or why not? What will the additional costs be? Finally, when you leave, if you've learned something negative, let's say you've learned now that cash flow is right at the precipice, because 80% of your borrower's business now is done with the state. And the state will pay, but probably only in 180 days. So you've got to you're already doing a cash flow projection in your mind. Well, that means there will be months of negative cash flow. That means that they may not be able to pay us. Are they paying their suppliers? Typically, they'll pay their suppliers before they'll pay you. Why? Because without suppliers, they have no raw material if they're producing a product. If you've learned something really negative, it can be about management too. If there are 2 or 3 late model BMWs in the parking lot, and you think that your borrower owns all 3 of them, and that seems like a big change of character, and you find out from the workforce that he's never around, that he seems to be spending most of his time at the luxury bars in the capital instead of attending to the company, that could be a very negative development. If you have learned something that's quite possibly very negative for the future of the company or the future of your loan, and yet you've managed to convince yourself as you get back in the car and go back to the bank that everything is okay, and you have that warm feeling inside, well, everything's all right. I made the loan after all, and I did such a good job of analysis. If in the face of the negative things you've learned, you have the warm feeling, you are in trouble. Your loan is in trouble, and you are in trouble, and it's time to recognize that for what it is. I wanted to say one thing about collections. Your management information system will show you who's making payments when. I would look just in a very unscientific, rough way at collection trends. This borrower always made her payments 10 days in advance. Now for the last 4 months, she's made them on the day they're due, which is fine. But I wonder why she's gone from 10 days in advance to the day they're due. Or this borrower for the first 2 years of the loan made her payments on the day due, not a day after, but for the last 3 months, her payments have been 7 to 10 days late. There's probably something going on, and you should make a visit. As hard as it is to get away from all the paperwork from the office, when you see a change in a general trend, you should make a visit. May not be anything wrong, but why not find out for sure?
Managing delinquency is an extremely important topic for MFIs. In our next episode, we will discuss the typical steps that are used to manage a delinquent loan, from making a warning phone call to starting a repossession process. Thank you for staying with us this time, and see you next week.